And for a good year plus, maybe a little less a year, I couldn't control the controllable. My brain wouldn't let me get there. And I don't think I've said more words to my kids, my personal kids, and all of my de facto kids through coaching other than control the controllable. And I couldn't get myself to that point.
Welcome back to the Stable Cyclist Podcast, and something a little different for you today. We have a podcast collaboration as my friend Jamie Wagner from the Eyes Up Mindset podcast is here, and we're going to sit down shortly with Nathan Stoa, head coach of the Hawley Nuggets. But Jamie, how are we doing, man? It's good to see you.
I'm doing well. I feel like I should obligatorily ask you a weather-related question because that's almost always where John and I land in these moments, but I'm not going to do that. It's wild to be in person doing this. It's awesome. Not a lot of those in the history of the Eyes Up podcast because we start in the pandemic and we can't, and then just for convenience sake, you're well aware of this, but it's awesome to be here and to have the capacity to do this overlap, right? You've been on my podcast a number of times. You've co-hosted on and I should say our podcast because John also, John Shirkey, he's on a boat right now and has been for a very long time. I don't know when he's coming back, but like 10 days from now. Anyway, it's just
tell us about your show. Like, what is it? Because people listening to the Stable Cyclist feed know, like, normally we talk about bikes, life mentality, and mental health. Yeah. And as long as we kind of have two of those things, I usually am like good with a guest coming on. And like today, we're not going to talk about bikes at all, but we're going to talk about life mentality and mental health for sure. Your podcast is typically about
sports, the intersection of sports and mental health, right? The capacity for us as leaders, coaches, teachers to bring in excellence to our performance, and how do we do that by managing our mental capacity, mental skill set, mental emotional regulation. You've had to understand this over the course of the last 4 years, but what you're doing specifically in cycling is what we try to do writ large. And yes, sports, quote unquote sports, right? But we just look at it from the lens of like, how does, and John was on your podcast, right? So some of the people that listen to that episode don't understand kind of what we're talking about, but the spectrum that is performance can be on the pathology side and disease and something that's potentially diagnosed, and then you have this excellence side. And it's not you're here and you're always here. There's a range that we're talking about all the time. And so when you said, let's do this, I think it's just a really natural fit, one, because we're close friends and we're going to have great conversations. We understand that. But number two, understanding that what you do in a specific way is what we do broadly. And then having, Coach on brings that full circle, I think. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And our guest today, Nathan Stoa, was a guest that really fit perfectly in your show. And there's some circumstances, it just hasn't happened yet. He is a friend of mine, and I said, let's do this together. I think this could be a good fit for both of us. And so for my listeners, if you want to go through your backlog, there's some really good stuff. If you're a coach, if you're a teacher, if you're a parent trying to work with athletes, or if you are, you guys had Jalen Brunson on the show when he was not yet
he was in between contracts, right? Yeah. Moving from the Mavs to the Knicks, and now he's a top 10 player in the NBA, and like Division I head wrestling coach at Ohio State, won a couple national titles, or I think 2, but he's coached a 4-time national champion and a multiple-time Olympic champion. So like having those conversations with these guys at the absolute peak of what they're doing, and then being able to understand, Coach Stoa is going through similar stuff, trying to figure out how to be his best in the same way. It all translates. Performance is performance. It's all good.
Yeah. Whether you're listening on my feed on the Stable Cyclist or on Jamie's feed, Eyes Up Mindset, do us a favor and go and give us a 5-star rating if you're listening on iTunes or on Apple Podcasts. iTunes.
Wow, we're old.
8 years ago. Apple Podcasts or Spotify, give us a rating. If you are on YouTube watching, I don't know if you're going to put this on YouTube.
Probably not.
Probably not. But if you're watching Stable Cyclists on YouTube, you can give us a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe and follow along if you like what you're hearing. Let's get Coach Stoa into the hot seat. Well, we are in Hawley, Minnesota today, and we're not probably going to talk about bikes, but we have a really compelling conversation to have today. I'm here with two of my really good friends, Jamie Wagner, who you already met in the introduction, and Nathan Stoa, the coach of many sports here in Hawley, Minnesota, and a former rival and now just a good friend. And yeah, how are we doing, guys?
Isn't that weird how that works? Like all of us kind of coached against each other in some capacity, and now we're here chilling, having a conversation about good stuff. So yeah, I'm good. You?
Doing well, relationship business, right? It all comes full circle.
Yeah, absolutely. And you and I kind of got to know each other through coaching cross country, actually. You are originally from the Fargo area. You went to Oak Grove High School. That's really where I first met you, was playing basketball, and your team was clowning on Pelican at the time. You were kind of clowning on everybody at the time. And yeah, like that was a big part of your life, is just growing up. Kind of take us through, when we have a bike guest on, we talk like no riding to pro license. Obviously, when it's not a bike guest, we talk about like zero to hero. So like, how did you go, like, what's your background and how did you kind of move into the coaching realm where we eventually crossed paths?
Ooh, almost feels loaded because there's a lot of things I get nostalgic. So we'll see if we can avoid some of that. But no, grew up for the most part through junior high in a small town of Thompson, North Dakota. Went through my a-hole stage with my parents when they forced me to move to Fargo, and found out that it was probably the best thing at the time for us, and chose to kind of follow the family bloodlines, as we had a lot on both sides of my mom's family, my dad's family. They went to Oak Grove. By no means was it something that was an expectation, just kind of ended up there because it was Class B, and in North Dakota, there was always something special about that Class B sports, and that was where all my plans had been made before we left Thompson. So it was, let's go through the application process and all that other stuff, and not knowing the tilted halo that would be hung on my head for being a private school kid going on in life. But jokes aside, it was a great place where I was impacted greatly by peers, but also by a good handful of the same people that positively impacted family members along the way. Teachers that had been there before probably taught us I know Mr. Hagnes taught us world history off the same overhead reels that he taught my parents off of, because that world history wasn't changing. And so it was fun to be a part of that and to hear those stories, and then to play basketball for Steve Carnell was a big piece. I was by no means anything that I would have probably wanted to coach too much from a skill and a talent standpoint, but from a passion and an enjoyment of the game standpoint and a coachability, I think it was there for the most part. And just as I went through trying to make the decision process of what am I going to do in college? Is it going to be that broadcast journalism route that I always thought, because Sports Center was such a pulling factor in life, and I'm like, oh, I can read the sports, I can do this, and then or is it going to be going into education so that I can have that total package with coaching and trying to impact kids along the way? And I sat down on two different phone calls with Roger Dagerman and David Moulton, and both of them said, yeah, you'll never be able to coach. Your kids, anybody's kids, nobody. And they all said it in a nice way. They loved their job, they loved their profession, but the time constraints of what they did just didn't allow that. So that tipped the scales and pushed me over into, okay, do I want to do the total package of teaching thing? Because I want to know what my real job is, and I want to be able to, be able to have the extracurricular parts be a part of it, because it's the total package. But am I going to be able to do the classroom job? That's the important part. And we got there. It took a little while. Might even taken a few extra methods conversations with teacher or with few extra methods classes with mentors and things like that. But yeah, I found that total package was going to be it. And so after Concordia, it was dive into the job market and We, started in the unfortunate young teacher rental phase with things, but popped around to a couple local places before my wife and I decided it was the right thing to do was to get away from family and try to figure out how to do things on our own. Moved over to Pine City, Minnesota for a fantastic 7 years of not much winning, but a lot of growing as family and as a husband, wife, and then said it was time to come back to family and stop having to send emails and send pictures. And I think she was running a blog online just so family could see what was going on with Brevin at the time, and then Callie not too much before we decided to move back. And then it was, here we are in Hawley, Minnesota, and come back and now cross paths with the guy I used to see standing at crosswalks in Moorhead, Minnesota, when we were both on our runs, one adorned in Cobber gear and one adorned in, was that Dragon Red?
Yuck. I'm sorry. You talked about losing and the growth that went through as a coach, as a teacher, like just being young and having that life stuff. When it's not going well, right, how does that impact the way that you're pouring into relationships? You talked about being a relationship business, kind of the first thing we said. What does that look like when it's not going well?
Well, it's one of those things that, too, as the puzzle gets put together on what you're eventually going to look like in the different portions of your career and things like that, we're growing. I never heard anybody tell me specifically coaching is a relationship business. Like that phrase feels a lot newer to me than the 21 years ago when this whole thing started, or if you want to go back to, methods and things like that in college. But you start to grow into it and you start to realize it. And then when someone says it and that key phrase comes along, you're like, heck yeah, that is what this is doing, but that's such a more concise way of looking at it. So there were, Pine was an interesting place, probably, still is. But we were trying to build something from the ground up. And when you got to lay a foundation within a basketball program and that hadn't seen consistent success since they were considered to be the same size as the St. Michael Albertvilles and stuff of the world in an old Rum River conference, I basically said in my interview, well, it's going to start with the first, second, and third graders, and we're going to work our way through and do the best we can otherwise. And then the relationship parts of that was the biggest one, that was the largest key, was being lied to in my interview. Oddly enough, I go, hey, do I get to pick my staff when I get here? And they said, yes. And then the first email I received after I accepted the job was, hi, I'm Keith Linsmeyer. I'm going to be your assistant coach.
Yeah.
And it couldn't have been I have never had another best thing happen that I didn't want. Yeah. And I learned quickly that the smartest guy on a bench isn't always the head coach, that the most experience and the most knowledge and different pieces like that the mentors can often be not the ones collecting wins and losses, if that's what's important to you, but it's like that it becomes this team effort. And then I said moving over there was what we needed to do to get away from family, and then to find family that's not blood and has been with us forever. So he turned into father figure, he turned into mentor, he turned into, basically godfather for the kids. And his wife was super impactful because she's super honest, and she made me completely understand at a young age how I can cause anxiety by having a plan and not ending practice when I said this is what happens to our student athletes. And she was just such a great advocate for the girls and for students in general, that she taught me a lot. And so just those relationships pouring in made the fact that having one winning season in 7 years, but having more than enough rewarding years. Yeah. And I don't think enough young coaches are told or taught, or maybe we're not even capable of understanding what success is versus what success to the media of the world, when I came over here, and they immediately said, one of our former reporters immediately said, well, that winning percentage isn't going to work for the people of Hawley. And I'm like, well, you don't have any idea where I was. You don't have any idea what we were trying to do. And you don't have any idea what's going to happen now that we've left, when those first, second, and third graders are now 7th, 8th, 9th graders. And here comes like 5, 6, 7, 8, 20-win seasons in a row. But helped me learn quickly that, because it was forced on me and the spotlight was put on me to go, maybe I got to step back here and I got to judge other people's success in a heck of a different way. And I got to find a way to dive in more to what they are actually doing and what they're going through in the process to find out what's actual success at this high school sports thing or college or anything else. I mean, we got a lot of different things going on with our kids that, certain people win 20 games a lot. Well, what's tilted in their favor right now, and what have they done correct to get to that spot too?
I think the challenging part about that, and JP, you can speak to this too, like, we aren't given the space as a culture to fail terribly well.
Right.
And then you get comments like that from the media or from something, and I just think about being a kid in that environment. I think about being 16 in that environment and saying, I'm supposed to be experimenting, I'm supposed to be failing, I'm supposed to be learning through the down periods to set myself up down the road for success. And then, my first head coaching job, I think I was 5-42 or something. I was just not good. And then I walk into a different environment with unbelievable assistance, with unbelievable mentorship in place, and we get to just explode into a successful position. But if you're just going based off the scoreboard, I was not fit for that position. But the things I learned through that failure phase, invaluable.
And I wouldn't trade the 7 years there. If you would have asked 21-year-old me, man, if you went 12-16. How are you going to feel? And that was our second best year, by the way. But if you're going to go 12-16 and you're going to walk out of there, how are you ever going to walk out of there going, I think that's the best job I've ever done? And you can tick off some boxes of how we showed growth through that, some of those moments. Like, I just don't know if 21-year-old me completely had that grasp of what it was going to be, despite my ego leading the way and going on Ed Post and only applying for head coaching jobs. I look back at some of the jobs I thought I could get and was ready for, and the people that ended up getting them going, what was I thinking? And you're not ready for Buffalo, Minnesota. You're not ready for, STM. You're not ready for those places, but you don't know what you don't know, and you got to find a way to learn along the way. And so, like I said, 15-year-old me seeing success as an athlete, and because of the teams I was on, not because of what I did for them, or 21-year-old me running and leading with ego like it's a unicorn horn or something like that. I mean, shoot, I don't think I would have completely grasped how successful you can feel when the scoreboard doesn't tilt your way.
So it's one thing to come into a culture or to build a culture in a town where you're not having that success, but you are improving and people are seeing incremental gains and incremental improvements. It's another thing, the forum reporter can say that to you, but they're also kind of right that like Hawley is in the conference that I coach in, and so like I know the vibe here and the expectation, and so how do you come in here? And it's one thing to kind of bring everybody along from the bottom. How do you teach those values that the winning's not the only thing here, and we're having success when the expectation is like up here to begin with?
You get gifted a 6'3", 220-pound future NFL tight end who might be the greatest Pied Piper of any school district that I've ever seen, and Ben Elfson. To come in here and to feel success right away, first off, I was just walked into talent I'd never seen before. And trust me, we'll talk about this in many ways, I'm sure, throughout the conversation. I still lose sleep over, Breckenridge going 12 of 15 from 3 and ending that season prematurely for what we were capable of doing. Yeah. But when you come into a situation like that and there's expectations, but there was a little bit of turmoil, there was a lot of turmoil before that. And some of it, when you really learn, that's another thing. What I know now about what happened in that season versus what I was able to read from across the state at the time, not being connected, two totally different narratives. The truth wasn't, anywhere in there, and the truth wouldn't have been a very fun thing to report, nor would it had been reportable, necessarily at the time. So you learn some of those things as well, and you learn that, I don't know if it was right for anybody to really truly succeed despite the talent before that. And so when you get a kid that's receptive to coaching, and more than that, not just receptive to coaching, receptive to conversation. Mm-hmm. How many times post-practice we just stood there and talked in the gym, and it was two of us. Yeah. It was one of us, semi-jokingly avoiding going and returning home because we lived with my in-laws for that year, and him wanting to get some shots up, but also wanting to talk and wanting to conversate about anything from, recruiting to, Phy-Ed class or biology class to what we need to do in the next game and how to get, some of the teammates to come along in the chemistry situation. So it helps when you can get those kids on your side right away and show them a vision that's going to work. Mm-hmm. And then after 0-2, I was a little concerned. And then being down 17 to start game 3, I'm like, oh man, we were really in some trouble. And we found a way to pull that one out, and it just started rolling. And so then it's pretty easy to get your message across. And I like the fact too that I'm versed in enough of the sports across the board that I was able to do a lot of describing of vision and things like that, and stuff like that with the guys. They're all clearly football players, but to be able to to kind of utilize some of the messages that have been given to them by a staff that I had a ton of respect for, and Coach Nats, that it was fun to be on the sidelines in the fall to see how everything ticked and know how to start to connect. And it hasn't been perfect since then. The next year was probably one of my roughest years in coaching, and then it was that build with young guys and coachable guys, and we hit a few different pinnacles along the way.
For sure. At some point in there, we're talking basketball. At some point, you are the guy that was running at Concordia while I was running at Moorhead State.
A lot of pounds ago.
Yeah, well, it's all good. No judgments. But you do start moving back into that role as cross-country coach. And did that happen immediately when you got here, or was that something that opened up once you were here?
The second year. The current coach was leaving from her teaching position. She'd done a pretty good job of building up and just getting kids out to a certain extent, and it hit its high water mark until just recently with I think it was the 2014 boys coming in second and getting out and going to state. And so that part was riding pretty high, but they were going to lose some kids in the process. And I just kind of sat around, I looked at the district, and I said, well, if not me, who? And that was kind of where the process started. I'm like, this sport was so good to me. Even when I was frustrated by the sport, it was still good to me. And it gave, we talk about rivals and stuff like that. You had Ben Nylander on. Ben, I'm the second person from my wedding party to be on a pod with you because Ben got there first. But Ben and I were in that Oak Grove Lisbon rivalry, and he's all cheery and all that stuff, and it's really hard to watch the guy run away from you and then come back all cheery until you know him, until you get to meet him, and then you start to love him, and then he's your teammate, and then he's in your wedding, because without him you don't figure out what your wife's last name actually is, and so there's a winding story there. But it's just, the sport's been good. It was good to me, and I looked around and I'm like, yeah, if not me, who? So I went through and over prepared for an interview where I walked in and he said, you sure you want it? Yeah. All right, it's yours. And then it was, okay, now what have I really gotten myself into as far as how to build? And it was, despite the boys definitely weren't the ground up, but losing their top runner and then having a couple move that were in those varsity scoring positions, and then trying to build a girls squad up that was struggling to put together a team, a full score.
Yeah.
So how do you get athletes? I mean, on the Eyes Up pod, we talk a lot with coaches about identity and building, a culture and creating this is who we are sort of thing. And you don't have, the boys maybe had some of that because they had some success, and success leads to that pretty quickly. This is just one of my pet questions all the time. I'm constantly thinking about how do you move from a program that has very little in the way of an identity about this is what we do and this is who we are, and being able to define it and say it out loud. If you asked an athlete, tell me who you are, right? When that doesn't exist, what are the steps that you took to try and create something like that? And obviously, we don't have a blueprint unless you write a Bible like JP did, but right, you create that over time. So
it took a while. It took a few years of me trying to figure out if I even could. Yeah. Because one of the things you're unfortunately set with in this side of the state is the monster that Jeff Morris has created in Perham. And it starts first and foremost there, and it's not the success. The success is fantastic for them. It's the fact that there's 4 billion kids somehow that exist in Perham that all want to run. Yeah. And yet,
they all run well.
And then they turn out to be incredibly well coached and passionate about it, and success breeds success. But you sit there and go, how in the heck do I go from nearly zero to anything that's going to formulate to compete with that? And how do I even go about, learning who all of these kids are and trying to figure out how to twist some kids' arms away from football and trying to, crack that, hey, why don't you come out and let us train you to run 5Ks instead of play volleyball? Yeah. Which is usually, I love the sport and I absolutely am, entrenched in watching our coaching staff currently do what they do. I really love what they've got going, and I learn a lot when I sneak into the gym for practice. But how do I recruit against that? Because that's usually one of the boxes that's ticked when mom and dad say, hey, you need to participate in something on the girls' side. And it's like, okay, I'll play volleyball. I'm not going to go run 5 miles or 8 miles or do 6 by 1,000. That looks crazy. And so it came with time, and once again, it came with an athlete. Listen to the kids. It came with an athlete moving into our district that wanted nothing more than for the sport that I once thought is way, way more individualistic than it was team, to say, hey, I know I'm already pretty good. I desperately want a team. And Lily Peterson coming in probably extended my career to the point we're at right now, not because of her talent, but because of her passion. And then it was put our brains together here and figure out how she is going to work on some girls. And we had 2 that were already waiting in the wings because they were doing, 6th grade races and stuff like that. And we got them out. And then it was, okay, track and field day's got to be important to us. And that might mean, during awards day, being slightly disrespectful to our FIA teachers, handing out ribbons, and go sit down next to Lily Olson and say, hey, cross country exists. What's cross country? Yep. And then trying to get that into the fold, to have a kid that just came out and nearly broke our track and field mile record, not know that there was another time to run in the fall. And it's like, okay, this stuff hasn't been out there. It's happenstance. These kids have come out. I have to go teach them. I have to go figure out how to just promote the sport. We got to make sure the articles in the paper are good and make sense to people. And there's a bunch of pictures. And then we've got to, make sure that every once in a while, it's not morning meeting in classroom. It's, hey, look at these pictures from the meet yesterday. Or this is awesome. This happened. Or we ran in mud. Or here's the video of being up in Ada and having to run through a ditch full of water because it would pour. Just anything to get them to say, hey, oh, this exists, and this is actually a thing that's out there for us to do. And then it was use the kids to help recruit, and now we've started to build into finding, using the basketball program. I mean, hey, if you're not active in the fall, be active. I don't care if you ever run varsity. You can be on the bike more than you're on your feet during practice if necessary, but come be a part of this. And then when you get, the biggest piece is when you get good people involved, they attract more good people to what you're doing. And, hopefully some talent comes with them, and you can train that talent as well. And I think that's where we've been successful here lately, is just good kids recruit good kids, and then you get good coaches on your side too, with the dance program coming in, and they're pushing their kids towards it, and it becomes a snowball effect.
Hey folks, real quick, if gravel racing and historic views are for you, then head to Bismarck in October for the Alchemist Gravel Fest. North Dakota, classically known as the Flatlands, is correct in eastern Dakota, but once you hit central North Dakota and the Missouri River, the landscape, well, it changes dramatically. And you can have your breath taken away by the views, just like Lewis and Clark did when they passed through over 200 years ago. October 5th this year, racers will race the Alchemist Gravel Fest in Mandan, North Dakota. Racers will start in Grainer Park south of Mandan and climb their way out of that Missouri River Valley onto the bluffs of Morton County. 55-mile course will test you with minimum maintenance roads, fast descents, some of the longest climbs around, but your efforts will not go unrewarded as the views are absolutely spectacular. And after the dust has settled, there will be awards to be had and hot off the grill food for everyone. Not up for a 55-mile race? Don't you worry. They've got you covered with the Elixir, a 30-mile version of the course that is just right for everyone. Additionally, there is camping available at the start-finish, and if you live in the Midwest, seriously, you can't go wrong heading to Bismarck, North Dakota, and their amazing bike scene for this race. This race is hosted by 701 Cycle and Sport, and I can tell you from a lot of experience, the crew at 701 know how to host an amazing race and put on a great time. There's a link to the Alchemist event in the episode description, or you can check it all out yourself at 701cycleandsport.com. Yeah, and I know the answer that you're going to give for this, or I generally... It's not just like, hey, it kind of improved. You got named Coach of the Year for Minnesota 3 years ago for cross country. So, like, I can't let you just sit here and be like, yeah, it's whatever. Like, we're having a good time. Like, you build a program here that's been really impressive and recognized by the entire state coach association.
Yeah, and I can't tell you what year's on it, JP. And that is not, I try, later on when we get into the weeds of some other things, I talk about just truth-telling and being productive with truth-telling, and so telling people what's really actually important to me and not letting them believe other things. It was awesome to get, but it was awesome because you don't get that unless the kids put their work and their sweat into it, whether it be the section stuff and those awards or whether it be the state one. And you don't get it unless you got great people standing next to you. And at that time, it was Chris Baxter, who had never run a cross-country race in his life. He's a college basketball player, new volleyball, pole vault coach. He wanted to change. Fayed guy, what a great recruiter, but what a great just booster of kids' emotions. I mean, and just to always pump them up and to be their advocate in every situation and stuff like that. And so to have someone like that was there, it was all of those awards come out because you are surrounded by great people.
Absolutely.
And kids that want to put the work into everybody else's sports punishment. I mean, that's what it comes down to. It's so cliche, but yeah, that's, we run 17s and 70 in basketball, and the cross-country kids are like, and then they go out and just beat everybody. Yeah. And they do it because, it's just what we do. We're okay with that. But to be recognized, it meant that we started to put the pieces in place that move the program forward and to be recognized in that way. And, there'll always be a certain little part of me that'll be like, there's people that have won that award a bunch of times that they probably say, I don't want it anymore, give it to somebody else. And, I happen to be somebody else, but it was great validation for the kids that put in that time. We can go put any plan forward we want, but if they don't give us their effort, if they don't empty their tanks on those days, it's not going to get us. It's not going to get us to, state, whatever it is, how many ever state meets it is in a row, counting the COVID year and all that stuff for the girls' side. And then, to be truly honest, in the building of the program, the girls just led. Period. Yeah. They led the boys for all those years. Their attitude became contagious to where We got guys out that wanted to be the same. They didn't want to be there with the girls. They wanted to be there working side by side with them. And that helped us, hit the pinnacle. I mean, that and Perm getting out of the section, helped us get to that section pinnacle. I had to text Jeff. It couldn't have been more than 15 minutes after the race when we realized that the boys had won the first ever section title in school history for cross country, where I texted him and I said, Jeff, 3 MVPs today. Charlie Larson from Pelican for winning the race, because without that, we don't win the team title. Arlan and Baki for outkicking 2 kids from Park Rapids, and you for getting the hell up out of the section. And, so things like that fall into place and matter as well.
Yeah.
I think it's so interesting. You talk about an assistant coming on that doesn't have a background in it. And, how many times, even in the conversation with Ben Nylander that you mentioned, like, we have a mutual friend because he coached with Ben at Jordan and is now in Pequot, like, that wasn't a jump coach, but that's how he and I connected with, he's a jump coach, and now, didn't have any background in that. Like, the thing that I think, and this is going to take us to another place, and JP can lead us there, but like, one of the things that I think about really deeply all the time is like, what translates. Obviously I have a language background, I speak other languages, and I'm always looking at the skills that translate from one part or one idea into another place. And just because you don't have, you're a vault coach and you're around track and field, that doesn't mean you're a distance coach. You know what I mean? But coaching is a skill that translates, and it does not, like, I'm not saying this in an arrogant way. I feel like I go and coach literally any sport with zero understanding, because it's not about the sport. It's not about the skill or the technique necessarily. I can hire people that can do that. My job as even an assistant is to create relationships, to instill confidence, to build people that can be successful. And I've learned how to do that through coaching, whether it was wrestling or track and field or whatever. If somebody asked me to coach baseball, I'd be like, sure. Like, if somebody asked me to coach soccer, sure. Like, I'll come and give my best to the thing. So, like, not turning someone away because they don't have the background or the experience, I think is such an insightful thing for us in all that we do.
Well, and I lived it too in my technically was my second stint or second stop, which was at Ulen Hitterdal. I was there for my second, third, and fourth year of education, and after the second year, our principal / AD came to me and he goes, "I need you to coach junior high football." Never put a helmet on, Kent. Never put shoulder pads on. I have played snow football, at the holidays when we weren't supposed to during the basketball season. That's the extent of my, football playing. How do you want me to do this? And he looked at me very black and white and he goes, you can coach. You'll learn the rest. Yep. And I didn't believe him. And so I was just like, I don't know, give me the weekend. And, talking about just stumbling into the most random of networks, my very first job was a weird hire. I got hired in the middle of October and in Dilworth, and the athletic director at the time was Craig Anderson. And Craig has a unique way of speaking. Usually every fourth word is not repeatable to my, my grandparents or anything like that. But I happened to be at a Concordia football game and I saw him and I go, "Coach, you're never going to believe what they want me to do." He was a longtime successful football coach. And I go, "They want me to coach football in Ulen. How desperate." And he goes, "You're a basketball guy, right?" I said, "Well, yeah." He goes, "Loved when my basketball guys were my OCs. Absolutely loved it. When basketball guys called my plays, we were so good. He goes, "I don't know what it is, but they just think the right way in my experience." And I'm like, okay. He goes, "So if I'm you, I'd do it because can't hurt." That was just kind of how, pointed and nonchalant. He probably doesn't even remember the conversation. And I'm like, all right, well, if he says he's right.
Well, and like, think about the program that they've built with that mindset, right? With that culture in place to say, it doesn't matter. Let's take advantage of the skills that these people bring to who we are, and let's leverage those things. Right?
And so I went back and I said, all right, here's the deal. I will coach junior high football, and I will sit down with our new head coach, and I will say, teach me everything you want on offense. Get me someone to do the defense. not that I didn't like defensive football or anything like that. I don't want to do it, but Craig said, nope, basketball guys, no offense. So I said, I'll have him teach me everything about the offense. We'll do whatever he wants done, and then I'll just manipulate it, call plays and practice plans and manage kids and do the CEO bit of that. And he gave me, that first at Randy Zimmerman. The next year, Brian Bergeson came in. They did the defense, had an absolute blast, and it was incredibly rewarding to step out of the comfort zone and to do that. So if I was to now, and oh, by the way, 2 state tournaments, which, as far as the first round of football, losing to those Stephen Argyle, and those Stephen Argyle runs, but talk about rewarding and talk about just, new networks, new friends, new build out of that, new successes and great feelings from it. So if I was to ever look at, anybody that hadn't done my sport and not be able to find value in what they are as a coach, I'd be kicking dirt back on, those that stepped out for me and brought me along.
So you're building this success. You're building this really successful cross-country program. The boys basketball program is really kind of on the ascent, or kind of really stabilized at a high level within the conference. Just as an aside for people, as a soccer coach, I always go and study other coaches during the off season, and like, you have always been the top of the list to come and watch practice, and just everything's going well. Your son is a freshman. We're coming out of COVID, and literally and proverbially hits the fan for your family. There's some huge headline news with a family member, and everything that kind of has been your identity or tied to your identity with Oak Grove and different things is kind of very much up in the air, and definitely WTF is going on.
Hey everyone, sorry for the interruption real quick here. I was just in the edit and I realized that I did a absolutely terrible job of leading us into that question and explaining what we're actually talking about here. And so here I'll fill in the details a little bit, because I think it really helps us moving forward understand how Coach Stoa felt and why this was such a problem. There was a family member of Coach Stoa's who was arrested for a crime. The crimes involved minors, and because of Coach Stoa's relationship in education and coaching, a lot of people tried to connect dots to him, and it made for a really tough stretch of time. Coach Stoa was not tied in with these crimes at all, and so we're going to move forward with that in our head as we understand now what we're talking about.
We're going to park here for a while, because I think this is more appropriate for listeners to understand. And I always talk on my show about people get stuck, and then how do you get unstuck from that? And there's different reasons why we get stuck, but family bomb, basically.
That was my word. I described it because of its public nature, and I don't have any ill will towards the properly reported portions of the public nature of it. There was some stuff that we have a couple news organizations that just run with it and leave everything else in the dust.
They do in the region.
Yep. But so I don't have any ill will towards the properly done job of it hitting the headlines, and because of the nature of it all and the nature of job positions and stuff like that, of course it's going to hit. But when people would come up and ask, especially people that weren't in my immediate therapy circle at the time, I described it as a bomb, and the bomb at the epicenter is going to shake all of the obvious people, and that's going to be my parents. That's going to be it's going to be me. It's going to be my wife through connection. Probably uncles, aunts, those kind of things. That's going to be right there. And then what really, really broke me and forced me into stuck was shrapnel. Was the shrapnel that came, and you're sitting at the epicenter of something and you have no answers. You are almost 40 years old or whatever it was, and you've got 2 kids, and you stand in front of kids on a daily basis, whether they're 6th graders or high school kids, and they look to you for answers, and you have none. Well, how are they supposed to get answers if you are flat busted?
Well, and it was a situation dealing with kids, which made it very complicated.
Yes, absolutely. And so then you get the epicenter stuff hits, and that's me immediately going, Mom and Dad, how are they? But then jumping to things that actually don't matter but do, And it's like, did this just devalue my dad's years in the pulpit? Because he's really, really good at what he does. Did this just screw that up? That's out of my control, but I can preach control the controllable. I know in your 2021 interview together, you talked about do what you preach, practice what you preach, all that stuff. No pun intended with the pulpit. And for a good year plus, maybe a little less a year, I couldn't control the controllable. My brain wouldn't let me get there. And I don't think I've said more words to my kids, my personal kids, and all of my de facto kids through coaching other than control the controllable. And I couldn't get myself to that point. What is this doing to my mother, who still works at the school and was his immediate superior in his extracurricular coaching? What did this do to, like I said, my dad's career? All of which are recoverable, but in the moment they didn't feel that way. And then what did I just do to my colleagues? I didn't do anything, but what did I just do to my colleagues? Do they have to, is their anxiety level? I don't want to add to people's anxiety levels. That's not my job. Did I just make them have to answer a ton of questions because they're associated with me, because somebody hired me here? Am I going to have kids that their parents don't trust me anymore because I'm connected? And I'm running through these things. And it wasn't just like this momentary run through. It was no matter how many times I talked to or vented to those closest, I still kept getting back to, what is this doing to other people who are unfortunately attached to me? Like, it literally ran through my mind, God, should Christina go back to her maiden name? Because she's got to go stand in front of her kids as an educator in a district closer to the situation, just proximity-wise. I'm like, what do we do? And I kept spinning and spinning and spinning in that situation. And, it was, and then the shrapnel parts, more than that, it becomes in an age where we all are attached to our phones and we have this connectivity. I can't protect Brevin. Mm-hmm. He's a freshman, but I can't protect him from everything. And so, going through, some of those things, it was difficult. And then my wife hit me with the thing that she couldn't get past. And I felt like an absolute trash dad for not going here first. But were my kids hurt? Mm-hmm. And the nature of were they somehow a part of it? And so thank God for connections and networks that you don't know you have. There were some she had an investigator in Moorhead's kid, and she got in touch with him. And then they got in touch with investigators in Fargo and gave her and I the reassurance that she needed, because she went there first and I didn't, for whatever reason. No, they weren't a part of anything. Mm-hmm. There was nothing there. And so it's like, once that moment hit and she was able to then start to get past what her biggest hurdle was, which should have been mine, then we were able to start having real conversations and start to at least process what was important and what wasn't. And then there was an outpouring of, JP, you threw long text messages in your point blank honest way that I couldn't appreciate anymore, because it wasn't going to be this candy coated BS of brighter days ahead. It wasn't that stuff which, irritated me. When I got those things, it was hey, I'd like to, I know a bunch of people are telling you this, but here's the grimy truth to this whole thing. And, and we went back and forth, and same thing with, a few others. Reed Ossie was great through text message and through some long phone calls about family trauma and drama and what goes on. And then I learned here really, really quickly by messaging who was really in my corner and who were going to be that crew that no matter what I needed, when I needed it, I was going to get it. And, so then it started that process of getting to the point of not worrying about, am I going to have a player walk away from the program? Am I have a kid that needs to switch homerooms so that they're not, all of those little things that I can't control other people's opinions on. Then it was that process of getting unstuck from those and now being able to focus on what is our family of four doing right now. Yeah. I have to kind of push things away, and we got to make sure that through this whole process, the family of four, Christina, Brevin, and Callie, and myself, that we are getting stronger, and we are somehow uniting through this disaster to make sure that everything is right for our kids. And at the time we were wrong. We thought that Callie was naively resilient. And she's a heck of a lot more observant than we gave her credit for. And it wasn't in what's going on, it's something's going on. And, unfortunately, that probably took a calendar year before that discussion really happened. So what kind of stress was she carrying? Also, those shrapnel pieces became the things that became our main focus, and making sure that we found a way to make sure that no matter what, when we came home, we were gonna be good, or we were gonna get. I was going to say get good, but I'm a language arts teacher, so we'll go with get better.
Yeah. One of the things, I know you have a million questions.
I am swimming in questions, but we'll get there.
One of the things I want people listening or watching to understand, you talk about a ton of internal stuff you were dealing with. And a lot of that stuff in this whole situation, right? You couldn't see it. You couldn't see what you were dealing with. I remember a situation, I will for sure get emotional talking about this, but I remember seeing a situation play out where your son is playing basketball, and we play in a very heated conference. And this whole deal, it's a crime dealing with youth, and your son started taking in a basketball game from people. And I know this happened in multiple places. And so how was that for you as the dad, but you're also the head coach of like, okay, I'm trying to do my job. And you said like, I'm so distracted by all this. I can't stop spinning. And now like literally the opposing crowd is riding my kid about this situation.
And I don't know how many times the situation ever became the focal point. I think that he would, you're the coach's kid, and you are as expressive as he is. That's a new word. Generous. Thanks to one of my elementary aides last year. She goes, yeah, he's so expressive. Yes, he is.
Thank you for being kind with those.
Yeah, well, I've told him right away. I said, hey, guess what? I finally found the word for you, but. So there was some of that, and there was one thing that he said to me, and now I'll probably get emotional on this one, though I've told the story a few times. I got multiple things. I started to grab on too tight on game nights, and for a while there, paying attention to things that aren't my it's supposed to be. An admin thing or whatever like that, in a way to make sure that I was going to be able to protect if protecting needed. And in one of the, because those were some of the roughest years for both he and I as far as coach and player, because the lines were so blurred and I was so stuck. And that doesn't mean he wasn't. You'd have to sit down and really evaluate how stuck he may have been at the time or what things he had heard, because the two times that he really called and said that he had run-ins with people were both in our building. And I'm sorry, one of them was in our building and one of them was just a social media happenstance that I don't think the person that said what they said remembered that they were Snap friends or whatever, you know? And I found two things that came out of this. And he looked at me when I questioned him, I don't remember which coaches were sitting there, but it was probably, at the time, it was probably Coach Travis Haugen and Drew Thompson. And he said, Dad, you don't have to worry about me going into the student section. You got to worry about Mason and Carson. We built the culture. Now, I don't want anybody in the student section. I don't want any fighting. We're not going to do that. That is not going to happen. But for him to know that he had two upperclassmen at the time, a senior and a junior, that he knew were going to have his back and give him a backbone. All right, Dad, step back. Coach, like fully coach, like should we go zone or do I want to pull my hair out? You know, whatever, you know, get back to that stuff. And then as time went on, you know, and we got further from the situation, I started to realize too that, you know, Timmy was probably the best of the friendly competitors that we had due to all the time in AAU and just who he is and how he's been raised and who his family is through and through. But there was still Micah Thompson and Perham. There was Owen Leach and Grant Anderson and Dilworth. These guys, I don't think we're going to let that stuff fly either. And, you know, I think that gave me a lot more confidence that, A, we were far enough away from this where I could relent a little bit on how worried I was about him. And actually then it just kind of allowed him to truly become the villain that he's okay being expressively, because part of that, you know, this is an aside from our situation, part of that aside in building the, you know, some parts of culture is I'll have everybody's back. Let the student sections come after me. They're not coming after me on that topic. So let them come after me for whatever else they want. Shoes, hair, the fact that I'm 0 for 5, bring it. Because if you're doing it to me, you aren't doing it to the other 4 on the floor. They can play free and I can play. You know, he was okay playing the villain. And I don't know if that was a process built through this whole thing, but, you know, that was something that, you know, he didn't mind being. And at times on the floor, that took spotlights potentially away from other people. And in the locker room, it definitely put the spotlight on he and I, because if I was going to do some coach cliche junk that he thought was going to negatively affect us, nope, he was going to put the spotlight on the two of us and make sure that the two of us had to be better and let everybody else go out and, you know, play free, even if those moments were uncomfortable. So I don't know if this whole process helped him build to who that was, because it made some uncomfortable situations down the road at times in his expressiveness. But as hard as, you know, I don't know, as hard as it was at times, he was probably more right than he was wrong in a lot of those moments, regardless of what the perception, you know, might be out there, or how uncomfortable some of those moments may have been behind closed doors. They got really uncomfortable for the two of us, and everybody else got to breathe. At least that's the way I look at it.
Yeah, well, and it hardened him and made him into who he was. And I will add, he was, as a senior now, the conference MVP this year. And so, like, he weathered this storm himself as a player and got to the point where he was recognized as the top guy. So, you know, and again, we're not like, words don't really matter, but sometimes you know, when you look at the broader story, you all smile about where we get at the end of it and have a good tear, because it's like, yeah, like
it was a goal that he checked off. He said, if I do all the things that I'm supposed to do to help, then that's one, that's a box that might get checked. And his words, if someone else got that box checked, I'll be really happy for one other person that one other person that would really deserve it. So,
yeah, I think about, even where JP was going there, it comes back to that translating of skills. We went through this experience. We had to weather this storm. Now, a storm on the basketball floor, not that big a deal. Maybe a storm between Dad and I in the locker room, not that big a deal. I go back to, what my experience in my podcast is about, right? It's this idea of managing the mental side of everything that we do. And our brains are certainty seeking machines. And you talked about that storm of, control the controllables, and I couldn't. Mm-hmm. And then talking about shrapnel, and it's like, it's really easy to pick a sliver out sometimes. So we deal with these relatively insignificant things, even though there's maybe, something else more towards something vital that's going on, and we don't address that because it's hard, it's challenging, it's difficult. And then that gets us to this stuck place. You talked about JP being truthful, and you even said earlier in the pod about being a coach and having that truth being foundational to who you guys are. How do you get back to dealing with, you said over the course of a year or whatever, we kind of said the four of us need to be what's important. In retrospect, if you could go back and talk about it, knowing what you know now, how would you get, and I'm just thinking about the listener, how do you get through the storm faster, or maybe learn to sit in the storm with more capacity? I read an article the other day called Rest and Repair. And it was like, yes, that's the job of all of us as parents. It's the job of all of us as coaches. It's the job of us in life, is like, stay in it and then learn to repair it. Mm-hmm. You went through something that a lot of people haven't experienced, and then you get this in a very public way. You get it with your son, like JP just talked. How do you help us, I guess, develop skills around sitting in the fire or working through the fire in a more meaningful, purposeful, clearer way now that you've had some time to think about that?
In retrospect, the things that worked the best, and I wish I would have gotten to all of them quicker, was, and for someone who I value therapy, I didn't go. The kids did at the very beginning, but I didn't go simply because I felt that I had a crew I could trust that was here to give me advice because they knew me and they knew how I ticked, which is eventually how that works. But my biggest piece going back on it would be to figure out really what's the most important at the time and get there. If I could have gotten there quicker, that would have been the best. And so those things would, simply were, like I said, the family of four, and that was making sure that we could have those conversations and making sure that, even despite, teenage hormones and things like that, that just were available. Sometimes it literally meant the game plan that night was, I really need to talk to Brevin, but he may not need me right now. So I'm just going to sit here on the couch and I'm going to put something on TV, and I'm going to hope that when he comes out, he sits for 5 minutes, maybe 10, maybe for a whole half of a basketball game, and we're going to talk. But getting to what's important. As far as outside of the family of four, I did a social media purge. I shut off every notification. There was, except for text messages, because those could be important from family, but I shut off every social media notification. I dropped upwards of 300 to plus people that I was looking for. And I told myself, if these people are on here, but I see them regularly and I don't ask how they're doing, how their camping trip was, whatever it was, maybe that's just too much for me right now. And I did some of that. So I just tried to narrow the things that were around me to get to those and keep those that were the most important to me. Because within those people, I was going to find the answers. And I did find the answers that I needed. And that was going to then also help me refocus the time to the things that I enjoyed as well. So I found myself on the golf course. And sometimes it was with a pod or with an audio book that I was going to be able to learn from. Other times it was start with a pod that I'm not going to learn anything from because all they're going to do is, crack inappropriate jokes or whatever it is all the way through. Yeah. And I'm going to go out there and I might play this game of golf angry. But what a better place by myself at 7 o'clock on the course trying to sneak in 18. What a better place to MF myself and be angry than to sit angry at home and potentially affect the relationships that have gotten me towards being unstuck. So I found myself out there way more, at times when I knew it was going to work for us. And some of those rounds were just, I'm blowing off steam. I don't know what I'm going to shoot, but I'd rather cuss myself out here and drop 3 or 4 mulligans than to go home and let the fact that the kid can't put laundry away be something that starts the fuse going, and now I have to repair that. And so I don't know if that's proper mental health, approaches to things, but I was going to do the best I could, despite the fact that I still stuck my foot in my mouth and dug holes around the house because that's just who I am. I was going to try to avoid those times as much as possible when I felt on edge. But I think the biggest piece was just relocating or whatever I don't even know what the word is. I don't know, re-engaging with the things that are truly important. And that's where the family of 4 was. And then that's where, truthfully speaking, it's where the family that isn't blood came in the strongest for both Christina and I.
Yeah, that family you choose, right? The family that is a choice. And, in a lot of ways, they're there more profoundly. And like having that network of people, I consider JP to be one of these people when I'm in a place where it's like, I just need an outlet of some sort. And golf isn't working, running isn't working. Like I'm still there, I'm still stuck, and as an athlete, it always worked, right? To go be physically out in the world. Well, when I have a kid that is, I have a 4-year-old, she is wonderful and she has her own ideas about life all the time. And I'm like, nope, this is how it's going to go. Like running doesn't always work, coaching, like, so how do you find that grounded, that anchor that pulls you back? And I think it's people, it's relationships, it's the capacity to know who those people are from day, like that can pull you out right now, or that are going to just provide the thing that you need. And sometimes that might be a podcast that's going to be full of inappropriate jokes or talking about sports or whatever it might be, biking even, maybe.
How you talked about, like, I kind of want to know, like, timeline here. You talked about how you got into this, like, cycle of just, like, runaway thoughts. Like, I can't control this. It's not 2 minutes here. It's all the time, 100% on. And, I mean, really, we're talking about, like, runaway anxiety, right? Like, uncontrolled. And I know you and I would message about that. And I'm always like, I'm never going to be like, go get help, right? I'm not that, like, I'm like, you got to decide when you're ready to go get help. I'm always here, right? I love you. I'm always here. So at what point do you go from like runaway thoughts to like, these are my 4, like, these are my boundaries that I'm going to try and work through this, to the point of opening up more, like letting more people back in?
I think the letting the right people back in part happened relatively quickly. Part of that being whether I always had an abundance of choices when it came to interviews for assistant positions, and things like that. I either hired well or I got lucky. And, sometimes it was seeking people out and, and other times it was you have you have the legitimate interview process choice, and you're going to pick the the right person. And so having having Travis and Drew there in the immediate nature of it, and having just having knowledge of who they were, how they were raised. Drew played for me. His dad was my assistant when I first got here. Knowing that I had them sincerely saying, oh, and mind you, Drew was my student teacher at the time too, which we finagled at Concordia to get him here so I could have him as a freshman coach, and then throw both principals, Kelly and Chris, on top of this to whatever you need, let us know what you need. And so some of those days it was, can Drew take the class for the afternoon? We got to go. And so once you start to see how trusted and in your corner those people are, the door opens really quickly for them, because those are the relationships that are going to keep spurring you forward. And so it's when you can say, hey, we will do anything that you need. Take with the time when you need the time. That time might literally have been, I looked at Trav, gave him a nod, and I walked into the coach's office and I sat there for 20 minutes. Do you know what didn't go wrong? Practice. You know what was just fine. And then even over and above that, the kids help too. I mean, the kids start to realize that they're looking at me. They're not looking at baggage that other people have tossed my way. So, and they're looking out for my kid. And so immediately upon the two of us, there was one day where things were pretty tough. And so both he and I missed practice. Well, practice didn't skip a beat from all reports. It looked like we were very much prepared for the next day of practice. But the 15 text messages that reached out from players, and to either one of us going, just wanted to check in. Is everything okay? Yep, needed the time. Everything's going to be okay. Appreciate you more than you know for reaching out. That's when you start to, instead of just see a sliver of opening in that door to let people back in, you start to see, no, the things that I was most worried about that are out of my control, that seem nonsensical now, those people were the ones that, start to help that unstuck process the most, and you let them back in. And then when a senior comes up to you, when a senior leader on the team comes up to you and just catches you one-on-one when you walk through the building and goes, just checking in on you, coach. All right, yeah, I'm good.
But that gets back to there's so many parallels between like our two stories. And in the sense of like when we fell apart, how we fell apart, we both had student teachers at the time, so we were able to manage the storm. But we get into like culture building, right? Creating culture. Why do you create culture? Well, it's not just so the kids have each other. It's so you all have each other. Yes. Why do coaches use words like family all the time? Because it's a family. Yep. Like, and these are the situations you see it. Like, why do we teach players to say I love you to each other? So that they know that they like truly love each other, and like, oh, you disappeared from practice today. I'm really
piece of me is gone.
Yeah, like
piece of art. My
family member is gone. Like, okay, we love you, coach. Are you okay? I got those messages too those days that I was gone back in 2020. Like, so, and this is where so many people. Sorry, I'm going to go on a rant here for a little bit, Jamie. So many people will talk about like, well, I've never experienced mental health. Why is this relevant to me? Okay, here's why it's relevant. Because you might be one of those other people. Yeah. Like, you might be one of those other people. And I brought up the thing that you won Coach of the Year earlier for the state, because that's in the middle of all of this.
Yeah.
This and like everybody's like, oh man, he's kicking ass and he's so functional and all of this. No, you were not. You were a hot mess. Nope. I won Coach of the Year in 2020 for the section 2 days after I was put in clinic for my mental health. And everybody was like, man, greatest season ever. No, I hadn't slept in like a month, right? Like, I was such a disaster. Everybody always, most of the time, we hear about suicides, right? Yeah. Oh, I never saw it coming. Yeah, no, you didn't see it coming, right? Because most people who struggle are still able to function at a fairly high level until like, oops, it's too late. And so like, if you don't struggle with mental health, this is why you need to like be plugged into the group you're in and be caring about people and be paying attention, because the high functioning people who struggle, they will be gone so fast. And you're like, what? I don't understand what happened. And you need to understand how to be there for them. And also, you can create this culture outside of coaching or the teaching realm. You know, some people will sit here and hear us talk about coaching and teaching, and we're building this culture. You can build it at work. You can build this culture in your family.
Absolutely.
You can, and it really comes down to letting people know around you, I love you. Right? Like, why do I say it on the podcast? Last thing I say every time, you are loved. You're part of this family, right? And whatever you're doing, let people around you know they're loved all the time. Build that culture so that when it falls apart, it will fall apart for someone around you or you, that you have a support system that can at least like prop you up. And you said to me yesterday on the phone, like, we were talking about how you describe it, and you said I was trying to drive a big ship without the ability to steer with my hands, right? Like, when we get in those situations, we have somebody that can at least like push our body against the steering wheel and be like,
hold it.
You got it, homie.
Yeah, no. Well, I just think I think there's something to this that's really, me sitting in the middle makes a lot of sense right now, right? Because JP's talking about like this high functioning can really be dangerous. Mm-hmm. This super high functioning, because it doesn't trigger the warning flags for everyone else. And what I hear you saying is like having a task that was get me back moving is really important. What's the unifying thread in all that? And I'm not saying that I'm sitting in the middle and I'm the unifying thread in any of this, but what I'm talking about is like the capacity to have relationships and community in that task, in that place where we are moving forward, because being stuck is exacerbated when we go and sit. Like, I'm not talking about that idea rest and repair is a big deal, but I'm not talking about just sit in it and wallow in it and feel all of it all the time, right? You have to move at some point. Mm-hmm. And that movement might be misleading to somebody else because it looks like you're doing great.
Right.
And so like this mental health piece of this conversation is our awareness to create in our relationships truth, love, care, kindness, appreciation, but communication. That's culture. Mm-hmm. That's in the family that we choose, the capacity to tell truthfully and to be held to truth, not to be able to get a text message from somebody and say, yeah, I'm good. Like, and JP is going to be the one that's going to hold us to, yeah, that's not true. Tell me what's actually going on, right? And we're from Minnesota and Minnesota nice, and we're going to say, yeah, everything's fine. No, like, it's not right now. And we have to have 3 or 4 or 6 or 2 or 1 at a minimum people that we can say, and that is not easy. That requires work from you and I and everybody else. You have to go there also. It's not going to be just show up and somebody's going to hold you to that. We have to work in it. We have to do the work, and it's not comfortable.
No, it's not comfortable, and there's, and in most cases, there's always still work to be done, whether it's internally or it's externally with those people. And in our situation, there's still a lot of work to be done, but there's still mental anxiety roadblocks or whatever that on my side of things stop me from doing it. But that it's one of the reasons why I hate when situations like this come up and people describe them as cancer, because we want cancer cut out. We want it cured. We want it gone. There isn't this, I found a way to, make up with it, or get better with it. That's why I don't ever let it slide if they're like, oh, the kid's a cancer to the team. Well, yeah, you're cutting that kid out.
Yeah.
No, I want that kid to have a chance to come back. I want that kid to be able to be resilient. I want to repair with this, and there's, I mean, and that doesn't necessarily mean within the team. It means I want to walk down the hallway and I want to still be able to, yeah, you walked away from my program kind of angry as a sophomore. Can I still say hi to you and greet you, and you greet back, and you're sitting in this, front row of the student section. We're not trying to, it's not a cut out and never go back thing. So I have some hope, and I have some, processes that I hope do get worked out and can figure those things. JP, you brought up the saying, I love you. And part of those, the part of truth and hard truths that I've settled on is productive truths. And because sometimes when you look at someone and they're like, get your bleep together, you're being truthful, but it isn't going to help anybody. Like they're just not going to respond. So how can I be productively truthful here in this situation and tell you how I feel or what I think you need to do to work through it? And, those can be harder conversations, but you take the edge off of them a little bit. But part of the productive truth, two parts to it was, and it was hard to put together because in our family, always told love. I knew I was loved. Absolutely 100% knew it. And, and then, because of that, and because I was surrounded by people that came from similar backgrounds, through high school and stuff like that, and then through college, everybody kind of had that. I hadn't been, it's an unfortunate sheltering, to find out that not everybody hears that. And then you start to get in the weeds of education and really do it, and in a couple of the jobs doing it in low socioeconomic areas and things like that. And you start to find out, no, this is really important. But yet also you start to work your way through what can I say? How blunt can I be with it? There's just that process of what does society say is okay? If I look at a group of 30 girls as a high school basketball coach and say, I love you, does that get taken wrong? So then at that point I got to find as many ways to show that I care as I can. And I wasn't great at it. It's been a process. And then it was 2015, Flip Saunders passed away. I wish I was mature enough to have watched him when the Wolves were at their peak and really cared about the nuts and bolts of the coaching aspect of it. But then he goes on drive time radio and it's Flip's Funkadelic in the cities, and you get to hear him as a person and you get to do all that. But it was something during his tribute after he passed, and way too many things come after people pass. But Milt Newton, who had been a long time associate of him in different organizations, he goes, Flip used to tell me all the time that he loved me. And I still remember the first time he told me he loved me. And I go, and this is his quote paraphrased, at this level, you keep that stuff to yourself. And then he goes, but Flip, in a tribute, he goes, I wanted you to know I love you too. And I hope to heck he got to say it to him for real. And this was just, kind of part of the tribute too, just to remind everybody it was okay. But that moment, as I'm sitting kind of now, tears in my eyes as I'm watching this game unfold, who could care less about the game. It's about this man who passed away and was impactful, and the relationships that he had created. Sitting there going, why can't we be that way? Yeah. Why? Absolutely not. I mean, it was one of those, if Flip can be that way. Yeah. If you can coach Rasheed Wallace and say, I love you, you could pretty much, do that with pretty much anybody, and you're going to work through technicals, you're going to work through missed practices, you're going to work through, the tough conversations. And then through our situation, the second part to this thought process, through the family situation, there was one day where tortilla challenge smacked me in the face. Coach Haugen had the book out on the dirty, crusty ottoman that we have in our coach's office. And I just looked at our roster. I don't know whether we won that night or we lost that night, but part of his job post game is to send the stats into the places that want the stats. And then he gets to make up a quote for me too that I either approve or say I don't really care what I said. Go ahead, send it in. And and we're getting the more and more, or the less and less I change the quotes, the more and more I know we're super in tune. But anyway, I looked at our roster, and I went down our roster, and I go, alcoholism that caused a split, unexpected divorce, situation eerily similar to our families, suicide, and there's probably 2 more. I go, we got 14 dudes on our roster, and I just said that.
Mm-hmm. They all got something in their back.
They all got.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm not sure if I really care anymore if we force to the baseline like we're supposed to. Yeah. I'm not sure I really care if we bought that pump fake. Yeah. I mean, we're going to work on it, but holy hell, I just went down that list and I didn't even mention my kid who was in there, which is then my situation, which is then everybody's situation because I'm there. And I just went down this list and I'm like, okay, we got more to do here. And you always knew it, but it was that moment, again, where I want to say to myself, do I deserve Coaches of the Year and things like that when it took me 18 years, 19 years to get smacked in the face by that reality? Mm-hmm. I think I'm behind. I think I'm way behind. Society might be behind too, but I kind of want to be better than our society most of the time. And so looking down that list, it was, I got to keep reiterating to these guys because we always have. We always said, phone always gets answered. Mm-hmm. Phone always gets answered, but these guys need to hear it more. The doorbell always gets answered. If it's nice out, we're going to go sit in the porch and we're going to talk. And that's been taken advantage of by a handful of kids over time. And, it's like, hey, a Spotlight burger is an easy thing to purchase. Let's sit down, let's talk, let's figure out where we're going. But it was just that, it was that moment. It was I don't know why the light bulb had to have been so dim for so long before it went on, but it was a tough pill to swallow because you're sitting there going, what do we really care? What do we really care about? We've always cared about the kids, and we've always known if there was a big situation that was there. And then, to kind of put a cap on that thought from my perspective, one of the kids that was really affected in a monster way, loved basketball, didn't play much, barely played. He was kind of the guy that went in, and we tried to get him a 3-pointer every time he went in and let the crowd go crazy. Didn't matter what the result of the game was going to be. It was his time to shine. Had gone through a situation that I will always rate way, way worse than ours. And we didn't used to do exit meetings with our seniors, but we started to about 3-4 years ago. And he sat down and I go, how was your season? He goes, I was where I needed to be and I got out of it what I needed. I don't care what our record was. I don't care that we went out prematurely in the playoffs to what I thought our expectations were. That kid got what he needed out of a situation that will be monumentally worse than what Brevin and I lived through and what Christina lived through. And I looked at Trav after he left. I go, we must have done our job. Yeah. And again, it's not wins and losses, but we had people where they needed to be and getting out of it what they needed to get out of it.
Yeah. So often as coaches, because so much gets put on winning, we forget that really all we are for every single kid is a safe space to come be an exercise for 2 hours a day. Yeah. That's the list.
So one of those podcasts I listened to, and this is actually one from before everything hit the fan, but it's something that I'll never forget. Dale Brown, coach at LSU, North Dakota Connections. He said something that sounded so corny when he first said it that I stopped before a putt and I rewound it like 3 times. And I'm just standing there on the 10th green in Hawley, and I just kept rewinding it. And I'm like, he goes, what's the original definition of coach? It is transport from one place to another. And he goes, and I'm like, and he goes, so the only caveat I'm going to throw on that as he was talking on the podcast was it's transport from one place to another, and that another has to be better. Yeah. I have to make that destination better. And I'm like, yep, that's it. That's really what we're doing.
Well, and what's really simple? What's the simplest way to do that? Love. I mean, like, and love as a verb. right? Because that's what you're talking about. The phone's always on. It's always answered. The doorbell's going to be answered. That's love as a verb. And it needs to be a verb before it's a noun. And once it can become a noun, because the verb has demonstrated it, we've unlocked so much for our athletes.
Liking Rasheed Wallace.
Yeah. I mean, Rasheed.
And then I brought up Rasheed Wallace in a pod. I love it.
Yeah.
And then I now have, to tie my process all together in this. And like I said, it's far from complete. If it was complete, I guess I'd probably worry about myself more. I think it kind of drives Brevin nuts at this point, because we'll have, when we have conversations, because just like I did back then, and you jump to that conclusion always for, oh man, that guy averages 20 a game. He just had 4. Man, he sucked. Or what's going on in his life? I'm now at that point where I'm like, maybe he was sick.
Yeah.
You didn't, I'm not my best when I'm sick, and you start to actually try to get curious. And that's the part where it's come into my unhealthy obsession with Ted Lasso. And that
all of us.
Yeah. But there's so much to take out of it. And I have, like I said, I'm on rewatch number 6. Yeah. And it's not that I'm learning something new. It's that it refreshes back in my brain again. But just there we go, a guy that doesn't know anything about the sport that he's in, but can find a way to bring people together and grow in its cartoonish and corny way. It still makes the most sense to me on what I want to do. And I'm definitely not that character. I can't say that I won't lose my cool from time to time or whatever the case might be, but it's definitely helped me be a lot more introspective into why the results are the way they are, or why someone was off that night, or to simply be able to ask the question and make sure that, I have an understanding of why someone just threw the ball out of bounds 3 straight possessions. Like, are you okay? Like, hey, let's step off the sideline. Is everything all right? Or your motor's going, but your hand's not on the steering wheel here. Like, are you, what's going on? And we're getting a lot more truth from that, to the point where this year at one point we had a lot of stuff going on within our team, and we had a lot of kids coming in to talk. And I told my AD at the end of the year, I said, that made it really, really hard, but it made me feel that we've done the right things, because they're willing to come in and talk. We've communicated, and they're willing to use us. And actually, this goes back a couple more years. I think it's 3 years ago now, maybe the biggest compliment I've ever got on the culture of our program from outside our coaching staff was getting a call from the football staff going, I know so-and-so has talked to you and they trust you. Today seemed really rough. Will you reach out to them? I'm like, yeah, well, 100%, as quick as I possibly can. And I probably didn't say thank you for sending me the text message, but holy heck, thanks for seeing that and trusting it, and knowing that we have that with that one athlete for sure that we shared, we had something going in the right direction.
Yeah, amazing. Coach, thanks for coming in and letting us really crack open your life here and get way more personal than, you knew we were going to get personal, but yeah.
But I know you well enough to know that.
Yeah, he was well prepared.
We're not going to stay on the surface ever.
Nope. Yeah. No, this has been amazing. And Jamie, thanks for swinging in.
Absolutely. I think the interests just align really well here. And Coach, we can't thank you enough for giving what you give, not just to our listenership, but to your athletes and to your community. So keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you. Like I said, I hope what we feel is what everybody else feels, and that that's what's going on, and that we truly have that care and compassion for our kids. And it doesn't mean we don't want to win, and it doesn't mean we don't do what we can to win, but that we're going to do our absolute best to try to look at the full athlete, and not just one at a time, but 40 at a time.
Thanks for hanging out today on the Stable Cyclist Podcast. Do me a favor, and if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, give us a review and even give us a 5-star rating while you're there. Please and thank you. If you're watching on YouTube, please give us a thumbs up and make sure you subscribe if you don't want to miss out on any of the content. And finally, the Stable Cyclist Podcast is a weekly-ish show where we talk to people about bikes, usually, life mentality, and mental health. Thanks for listening and watching today. And more important than anything, remember that you are loved.